Hey folks, David Storter. Hope you guys are having a fantastic day. Time for some more Storycraft. Before I hop into talking about the forest, let me tell you that you can get a free copy of my newest book, Demon Ex Machina, by joining my mailing list. I don't know how long I'll run this promotion, but anyway, you can grab it now, dvspress.com/free-book. You can hop on my mailing list and get a free copy of that. This one doesn't have the forest, it has deserts, but I've written forests in several of my books, including these two fantasy books, The Water of Awakening and Needle Ash. As you can guess by the presence of trees on the covers, there are forests. Like a lot of other pieces of literature, I use the forest as a stop along the way of the journey. It's something that's between the character and their final destination. Forests are different from deserts in that what is threatening about a forest is not what it lacks, like water in the desert, but rather what is in it, which is creatures, unknown monsters maybe, things that come out at night like wolves, as well as the fact that it's difficult to tell where you're going in the forest. You can't see the sun a lot of the times. Certainly in the woods by my house, it's difficult to see the sun. If you're out in the desert, you can tell north, south, east, and west pretty easily because the sky is big and open and you can see where the sun is or where the stars are. Not so easy in the forest. That's why the whole maybe moss grows on the north side of trees. Not always, but it can kind of help you get going in the right direction. But if you've ever been in a forest and you look all around, it's easy to get lost. So the forest is a place of wandering. It's a place of the uncanny because of what is unknown within it. It's difficult to see far, and so it's easy for your imagination to go wild and think of things that are out there. If you've been in the forest at night, it's full of noises. Unlike the desert, which has not so many noises, the forest is full of them. There's insects clacking. There's little critters rustling in the bushes. There's frogs croaking. Maybe Bigfoot's stomping around. What makes the forest a threatening and uncanny place is what you don't know about it. That's going to be true of a lot of environments. But there's other things that go along with forests that we can take from some of the giants in literature and how they've used forests. I think one of the best examples is Tolkien. I think Tolkien really captures the sense of the forest as a threatening, uncanny, strange, and really dangerous place. And he does this in all of his books. I think Return of the King is probably the only one of the major Rings books that doesn't have a forest in it because we've gotten past the forest at that point. So in The Hobbit, of course, we have our first encounter with something threatening is in a forest. It's in the forest with the trolls. So this is not the forest of Mirkwood, but what happens? Oh, I think I see light through the trees. Well, we better go investigate it and see what's going on out there. Turns out it's trolls, something that's a monster. So this is serves a really important point in The Hobbit, which is that while we are journeying with fantastical creatures, dwarves and hobbits, we haven't encountered any monsters yet. So it's the first monster, the first real threat to the party happens in a forest. Then, of course, eventually you get over to Mirkwood, and Mirkwood is the classic example of the uncanny forest. You go in, it's very dark. Things look dead and twisted. Things look a little bit strange. The wildlife is strange. There's squirrels. They don't taste very good. You can't see past the path. It just looks like eternal twilight within. And twilight is itself a limbic state. It's a state of transition between night and day, or between night and morning, or between morning and night. That twilight half light gives you a sense of a limbic space. And so forests are also a bit of a limbic space, a transitionary space. Of course, you can't drink from the river that flows through it. It's a magic river. It puts Bomber to sleep. They get into trouble going and seeking out fires once again that they think are elvish feasts, only to end up alone and captured by spiders, giant monsters that lurk within the forest and give them a very difficult time, and then they're captured by elves. You notice elves tend to live in forests in a lot of tales. This is true of Tolkien, but it's also true of things like Dunsany and many other tales. Elves are often associated with the forest because they're nature spirits, and the forest is a very natural place. It's full of the wild things, and elves are usually viewed as part of the wild things. Now, in Tolkien's mythology, elves are a lot more than that, but the wood elves and the Hobbit certainly serve that purpose as well. They're part of the uncanny, a little bit more civilized and higher thinking part, but they certainly begin as something which is uncanny. They're in They're having a feast outside. There's an elven king. Each feast they do it 3 times, I think, and each feast gets more grand than the last. It's a little bit of a fairy tale trope. You notice fairy tales, things often happen in 3s. There's 3 bears. I wrote a fairy tale called Garamesh and the Farmer. It's 3 suitors, 3 tasks. That's what it was originally called. So there's 3 tasks that they have to accomplish, and there's 3 different suitors trying to get the princess to marry them. So the number 3 occurs a lot in fairy tales. That's just an aside. But the forest is a threatening, dark, and uncanny place because you don't know where you're going. You have to trust that you're on the right path. You don't know what's out there that could threaten you, and your imagination goes wild. I think it was Stephen King that said the best way to scare people is not to show them something scary, but to point at the darkness and let them imagine whatever is scariest to them. To give them hints as to something scary that they then have to imagine themselves. And I think the forest serves that well. Of course, as we go on to Lord of the Rings, you have the Old Forest, which serves some of the same purpose as the Trolls and the Hobbit, which is the hobbits are escaping from the Shire. Of course, the Shire is full of forests, but these aren't really uncanny forests. These are very nice little civilized forests without too many people too far away. There's nice little foxes that come by and sniff the hobbits and have inner thoughts about what are the hobbits doing sleeping outside, but they're not threatening. Rather, it's the Old Forest when things start to get scary. So there's a difference between forests which maybe are tame, like the way a lot of people in Europe view forests, and really wild forests where nobody lives, which is how most of the forests are here in North America where I live. Our forests are vast tracts of wilderness where maybe there's a trail and you don't know where the trail goes. Anyway, they go into the Old Forest. They get lost in the Old Forest. Something that you really don't want to be is lost in the forest, far away from where you need to be and where it's easy to get food and where it's easy to be safe. And they end up encountering, of course, a threatening tree, an evil tree, Old Man Willow. They get lost in the Withywindle. And then they get saved by a forest spirit, a kind of elf, which is Tom Bombadil. Tom Bombadil is a flavor of the uncanny living in the forest as well. And he, of course, helps them journey out of the uncanny limbic space of the Old Forest and takes them to his home, which is, again, another transitionary place between the Fae of the Old Forest, the Fae world, the fairy world, and then the more oppressive darkness that is the world outside, including the Barrow Downs, which they journey through in the next part of the book. But the Old Forest serves that purpose. It takes them out of what's familiar, out of what is the normal cultivation of life, and into the wild cultivation of life where things go crazy. Trees are often remain standing when they're dead. Things aren't cultivated by human hands, and so they grow and attack each other and destroy each other and knock each other down. That's what you get in the woods. Ivy will pull down trees. Vines will pull down trees. Trees will fall over. If you find a fallen tree in the forest, it's interesting because, like, you know, no one made that tree fall over. Rather, it was the wind or life or termites eating it or something that ended up destroying the tree over time. Life destroys itself. That's part of the cycle in the wild. And then you have the flip side of that, Fangorn Forest. Fangorn is a cultivated forest. It's not that wild. So the first impression that the characters get when they go to Fangorn is like, this is a wild forest. And it is a threatening forest, but not to them because it's cultivated by the Ents. So it ends up being using our sense of the forest being scary to deceive us a little bit, and then we're presented with Treebeard and the other Ents, which make Fangorn Forest actually a very safe place for the hobbits, and a place of civilization, but a strange civilization, an uncanny civilization, something that's outside of your normal realm and is full of unexpected things. And of course, the forest is very dangerous to the orcs, because it ends up killing them. The Huorns go off and help at the Battle of Helm's Deep and all that kind of stuff. So 2 different uses of the forest kind of inverted to each other in The Lord of the Rings. And then the last use is Lothlorien, which happens before they get to Fangorn. It happens in Fellowship of the Ring. But what do you get in Lothlorien? You get another flavor of the uncanny. Rather than something frightening, something oppressive, rather it's something ancient, something unapproachable, something divine in the forest of Lothlorien. It's a cultivated forest. It's a forest full of people. It's kind of a forest as it's meant to be. It's an idealization of the forest. So you have these 3 different flavors of the forest in Lord of the Rings, and all of them, I think, work really good for settings. Now, how have I used the forest in some of my books? Not to just go on and on about Tolkien, but those are 3 really excellent uses in one book. So in this one, the forest is literally the Fae. It's literally fairy. It's literally chaos. in a sense. So when Helga, the main character, gets to the Feylands, they are presented as a giant forest, at least on the outside. And the inside, they're a desert. There's some symbolic meaning to that with the relationship between the chaos of magic and the outside world, which is very fixed. But things are not certain there. Not only they're not certain because you don't know it, but things can change places. The people that are there can change their natures and their appearances. When you run into the forest, you don't know what direction you're going because you could be going in any direction. Direction breaks down once you get to the Feylands in this book. So the forest is the apex of the uncanny in that book. There's no sense of reality when you get there. Reality breaks down when you get to the land of the Fey. And it becomes an unfamiliar, strange, and dangerous place because you are not accustomed to things which can change. It will. You really can't expect anything. The forest in this one is not in the Feylands, but rather like a hidden elf realm. Of course, there's elves that live there, dark elves. So again, the association of elves, nature spirits, with the wild and unapproachable and dark nature of the world. And in this case, they're in a forest which there's no sun in this realm. Rather, the forest is what gives you what minimal light you have. And there's a threat within that, which is these sort of corrupted beings that I don't need to get too deep into because I don't want to give away too much of the middle section of this book, but that's what you get. So you have, again, more of those elements, the presence of elves. All of this stuff I wouldn't say I did directly, like plotting it off of Tolkien, but these are the things that I think feel correct for stories. This goes all the way back to fairy tales. Hansel and Gretel go off into the forest, and what happens? They don't want to get lost. They leave a crumb of bread trails. The birds come and eat the crumbs. The forest is a dangerous place. That's why so many fairy tales have a character going off into the forest and getting themselves into trouble. They get captured by a witch, or Goldilocks finds a cabin in the forest, and there's 3 bears that live there because bears live in the forest, and bears are very dangerous. You have books that are more visceral horror books, like The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon by Stephen King. It's about a little girl getting lost in the forest and imagining a monster chasing her. It turns out it's a bear. But that bear is monstrous to a child, and it's very monstrous to a child with an imagination. So it's a really good use of a monster in the forest. Or if you've watched the movie The Edge, there's a similar setup with that. They're being chased by a bloodthirsty bear through the forest. They get lost in the forest. They're clever. The clever ingenuity of one of the characters fails because he's unable to make a compass to tell them what direction to travel in. They end up going in a big circle. All of the things that you would expect in a tale that's set in the forest are there. Getting lost, losing your direction, and having a monster that wants to eat you. Like an old forest. In this case, it's a tree that wants to eat you, not a bear, but it's the same idea. So the uncanny of the forest is about the threats that are in it. Creatures that want to eat you, being lost in the forest and being unable to reach civilization again, being lost in the Fae, right? Not knowing what direction that you go in and being afraid that you'll never be able to get out of it again. These are things that you can feel if you go to the forest and just spin around 4 times somewhere. Spin around a bunch of times, and then all of a sudden you're lost. It's crazy how quick you can get lost in the forest. And why being able to know your way through a forest is such a valuable and important skill. So you have characters that help other characters through forests. This also happens in Lord of the Rings when the Gan helps the Rohirrim, right, to navigate their way over to Rohan through forests and things like that. So all of those elements are great to use in stories about forests. There's so many stories that include a forest and include these elements that I'm talking about with the forest. I'd love to hear some of yours down below in the comment section, and tell me what you think about those, and whether you think the forest is a good setting to put a whole book in, or if you use it the way I've used it and the way other authors have used it, as if it's the entire book is in the forest, it's like a horror book, and otherwise it's like, it's a transitionary stage. It's something that's a barrier between you and your final goals. It's something that stands between you and what the character really wants to get to. Of course, lots of horror movies are set in the forest. Evil Dead movies, There was one called Cabin in the Woods. The Blair Witch Project. All of these use that uncanny element of the forest that we don't really know what's out there to really, really good effect. So I think it's a great setting for horror, but it's also just a great transitionary setting for something like fantasy. You go through the forest to get to your quest goal, and that's part of it. There's even the forest in Return of the Jedi has some of these elements. The technological behemoth of the Empire has an outpost, and what's out in the forest but little wild Ewoks. It's the wild attacking the technology and destroying it. That's what the Ewoks kind of symbolize when they attack the Empire at the end of Return of the Jedi. I don't know. You could probably think of 100 different more examples of how the forest is used in fiction, but I just thought I would give you Tolkien because he does such a good job with it, and he loves trees so much. Hey, trees can be loved, but they can also be dangerous. So let me know what you think, and I'll talk to you all next time. Newest book is called Demon Ex Machina, and you can grab it for free if you join my mailing list. And, of course, you can buy these fantasy books. Book 3 in this series I'm going to try to get out this year. I just am working on timing and a couple of other things. So anyway, stay tuned for that, and I'll see you all next time.